click record. Great. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming along this evening to our mini mock. I'm just going to get started. There'll probably be a few more rolling in, and I'll just open up my chat as well. All right, and we're good to go. So before we begin, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional and rightful owners of the land. For me, I live and work on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to them, to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And I pay my respects to anyone else here this evening who identifies as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. And so I would like to welcome you to our mini mock event this evening. Thank you for coming along. We're excited to have you here. I hope that it's helpful for you. Just letting you know, we will be recording it. We'll send out the recording afterwards, but also just any sort of like questions or anything you ask, we will also have in the recording. So just making you aware of that. So just a little bit about us. Before we begin, actually, I would love for you all to fill in a quick poll. So I'm just going to launch it. And I'll just let in a few more people. Hello, welcome. Incredible. Okay, I think that's most people have filled in the poll. So looks like we're a pretty even split. About half of you have heard of us before and a little less than half have sat the GAMSAT before. So we'll keep that in mind this evening for anyone who, or just in general, if you haven't sat the GAMSAT before, we'll try and give you a bit of a heads up of what's going on as we go through. And for those who have, it's a good refresher anyway. And I'll just give you a quick rundown a bit on Halad to Health, who I am and who's going to be running the session tonight. So we're not actually a GAMSAT company. We're a not-for-profit charity that runs health education missions in the Philippines for communities that have lower health literacy. And we help them to be better equipped with health education and also to then act on that. So things that we would take for granted here in Australia that they don't have, we help them with. And all of our funds from our GAMSAT tuition goes towards that. So that's what we do. And the reason why we do it is because we care. We care about health, education and social impact. And we care about that both for our GAMSAT students and you getting the best GAMSAT education and preparation that you can, and for everyone in the Philippines who we serve as well. So we've had over 2,500 students come along to things like our masterclasses, our mini mocks, our courses, and have touch points with us. And because of this, we've been able to raise tens of thousands of dollars. I think actually this needs to be updated from last season. It's probably about doubled now to help out in the Philippines, which is really exciting. And we're continuing to grow. So thank you so much for coming along tonight. And hopefully you get something out of it too. So I'd just like to introduce you to who will be running tonight's session. So we have me, but I'll be taking a little bit of a back seat. I'm Sarah. I run the GAMSAT courses. Most of you have probably heard from me or seen me in your email inboxes over the past week or so. And I sort of take care of all of the oversight of everything GAMSAT and Med Prep at Halad. We have Sana. She's one of our new Section 1 tutors. She's a 4th year med student at Monash. And we have Jack. And Jack is our Section 3 tutor, and both of them will be running the Section 1 and the Section 3 portions of tonight's event. We also have Grace, and Grace is a Section 2 tutor. Now, whether Grace is able to join us or not depends. If Grace doesn't make it in time, she just has something personal going on at the moment, then I'll take care of Section 2 tonight. So it'll either be me or Grace. Either of us are more than well equipped to take care of this section and answer all of your questions. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Firstly, just the whole point of you being here tonight is so that you can get the best out of your GAMSAT prep as possible, even if it's just coming along to the mini mock, having a go, trying out the questions. That's what we want you to do. And we don't just want you to do well at the GAMSAT, we want you to really do well at being a fantastic healthcare professional. So feel free to ask us questions, not only about the GAMSAT, but just about what it's like to be a medical student, what it's like to work in this field, and we're happy to answer anything for you. So in terms of how tonight will run, we're going to do each section of the GAMSAT, sort of literally what it sounds like, a mini mock. So we'll do a little version of each section so that you can get a bit of a taste for it. So all of the questions are from the mock exams that we ran or that we run with our courses and that we ran last season, and we've open sourced them for you tonight. So you have 15 minutes to do 10 questions from section 1 and 20 minutes to do 10 questions from section 3. And both of those afterwards, the tutors will then run through the questions and some answers with you. And for section 2 will be slightly different. You'll have 20 minutes to write to one of the prompts. Tonight will be a task B prompt, and then we'll have a look at a student sample, and also the tutors will go over it, either Grace or myself or both. So that's how the 3 sections will run. Each section as well, feel free to ask questions, just put them in the chat or shout out, completely up to you. I'll take care of all of the back end sort of tech things. So I'll put links and things in the chat as we go. I'll put up timers, things like that. And then the tutors will be the ones actually giving you explanations. After tonight, I will send out explanations in a document for all of the questions and all of the answers. So you'll get a copy of all of the questions to look over after tonight and all of the explanations. So feel free to ask your questions, but also if we don't get to all of your questions tonight, then you can also look at the explanations afterwards. So with that said, we might get started. One more thing I'll mention, I think I emailed most of you about this, but we are running a competition tonight. So if you stay until the end when we fill out the feedback forms, then one of you will have the chance to win getting 2 of your essays marked whenever you like. It doesn't have to be straight away by our markers, and they'll be marked by 4 people in total. So you can get a lot of live feedback from them from some of your essays that you're working on for section 2. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, feel free just to give everything a go tonight. It's okay if you don't feel even close to ready for the GAMSAT. Remember that the GAMSAT isn't until September. So just wanted to reiterate that and have everyone keep that in mind. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop sharing this screen now, and I'm going to get up my links and we can get started. So we'll start with section 1. And I know some of you, this might be your first moment of starting GAMSAT things. So with that in mind, these are the links you'll need. The first link will have the questions that you're going to give a try. With section 1, you'll be given a set of prompts or a set of text that you have to read and answer questions, a little bit like comprehension style. And then on the second link is where you're going to put in your answers. So if you've never done it before, that's fine. Just give it a go. And then afterwards, Sana will go through some tips to do with each of the texts and also some of the questions that you guys found the trickiest. So if I could get a thumbs up when people are, or just a yes in the chat, whatever's easier, when people are ready and good to go and that those links worked for you. Cool. We're getting some amazing. Cool. All right, looking good, looking like people are ready to go. Okay, so I'm just going to share the timer so that you know how long you have left. All good, terrific. All right, then in that case, you can start. Great, so that's section 1 done. So I'm going to hand over to Sana now, and she'll run through some of the, she'll run through the text and also some of the questions. And just quickly going to answer this question while feel free to start screen sharing, Sana. Is this time limit a good indication of how long to spend on 10 questions and 2 passages? Yep, so we've sort of worked out the times for each of these tonight so that it is quite indicative of how long you would spend on things, saying that some of these passages were a little bit shorter because your comments are a little bit shorter, but still I would say this is pretty indicative of timing. Cool, so I'll hand it over to Sana.
All right, hello everyone, my name's Sana and I love section 1 and I'm so excited that you're all here tonight, not even as a joke, I love it. So I'm really excited to get into it. I just want to show you first of all, this is the distribution of everyone's scores. Please understand that it's definitely not indicative of how you'll do in the GAMSAT. The GAMSAT's still 3 months away. A lot of you guys are just starting to get into GAMSAT prep. This is just an understanding of how it's distributed. My most important point or takeaway from this is the frequently missed questions here. So this is just the questions that people found really hard. So if you struggle with question 5 or question 8, that's understandable. They're difficult questions, and we'll talk a bit about those ones as we go through it. So in terms of section 1, we split it up into units. So unit 1 is a comments style question. So this is a kind of text where they can give you like 3 or 4 comments, which could be anything between quotes or poems in this case, or sayings, or even like some random thing written on Tumblr, who knows. So the key point is approaching this in terms of individually, what does each of them mean, or what are they saying essentially? And then together, what is the overall theme? And then how does each comment take a particular spin on that main theme? Also, if you guys want to turn on your cameras, if you want to give me a thumbs up, I am getting no feedback, so just going to go on ahead. Okay, so comment 1. If you found this poem challenging, don't worry, I found it challenging too, and I love poems. It's fine. It's a bit of a daunting text, but I just want to do it tonight so that you can take away not feeling so scared, or that even if you do find something scary to begin with, it's okay. You can still use techniques to work through it. The way that I dissect this is I basically look at each verse and what it means. If I still, and I get a general vibe of it, and I'm like, okay, what's some profundities, what profound simplicities? I'm like, cool, they're enjoying life, they're chilling. How can I trust them, etc. And I'm like, okay, so they're finding a bit of difficulty with different people and how they act. And they're saying they're a part of humankind, but they're not going to believe your big sad lie. So overall, I'm getting a sense of like some philosophical interpretation of life or humanity. Then in comment 2, I'm like, okay, the general theme is humanity, because I'm reading about what this person thinks is being a good human is about. And then comment 3, being human does not mean that an individual possesses humanity. I'm like, okay, they're like, you need to actively do something to express humanity, basically. So I'm like, okay, the general theme is humanity. These are the texts. Then often, if you've done that work, just as you're reading through, you can already answer a lot of the questions, because they'll often be focused on the differences or similarities between different comments and their meanings. So I'm going to go and see, question 1 is the main theme. And I'm just going to go to question 5, which everyone found a bit difficult. And the question, what does the author of comment 1 mean when they express neither of us will believe in your big sad lie? Now, this is easily one of the most ambiguous lines in these comments, so it's understandable that it's very confusing. I just wanted to show you guys the distribution of answers for this question. As you can see, huge distribution, all the answers got chosen, so don't feel bad. I'm just going to go through why C is the correct answer, and then I'm going to talk about the other most popular answers too. So here is a different document with all the explanations, and C is the correct answer. And it says there is more to life than subscribing to the notion that it is all dismal. And this is quite a complex question, because you have to conclude this from the meaning of the other verses in the text. So like it says, or as I'll just show you up here. The first stance says that basically it's not all dismal, because there are some really beautiful things, even though there are a lot of contradictions in life. The second stance says that there are some bad things in life. And so what it's actually saying when it says neither of us will believe your big sad lie is that even though there are hard things in life, there are also good things. So that is why C is the correct answer. Now, in terms of the other most popular answers, Answer A, even lies designed to protect people are still laced with sadness and difficult to believe. I get why people would have chosen that answer, and I might have actually chosen that answer too. The reason why it's not quite the right answer is that, yes, it has those contradictions in it, that the poem itself has contradictions in, as in like there are good and bad things. But there's nothing in the poem that specifically indicates that there's lies being told to protect someone. So there's not enough evidence in the text to support that. Then looking at B, despite contradicting messages, people are generally good in the world. I don't think it necessarily takes that stance either, because if you look back at the text, it doesn't say people are generally good. And mostly it's about like lies or not being able to trust people, and the goodness is rather the simple things in life rather than people. So that's why that doesn't really quite fit. And D, it is more important being inquisitive about the things we're told so we don't automatically believe the lies surrounding us. That could be true, but it's not as true as, or it doesn't fit the text as well as there is more to life, then that it's just all dismal. If the text was more about being really skeptical about what you're presented with in life, then answer D would fit. Can I get someone to unmute, say, or put like a thumbs up if they understand that, if that makes sense? Cool. All right, good. Okay, now unit 8, so the second unit for tonight, is a non-fiction text. So the way that I tend to approach non-fiction texts is, as with all texts, I think, what is the main message of the text? But also for non-fiction, because it's often someone writing from their story or their life, as it is in a memoir style non-fic text such as this, I'm also thinking about, why did this person write this? What context do they have? And why do they feel the need to put this sort of writing out there? And that'll help you answer these sorts of questions. So the question that people most struggle with was question 8, which I think is a perfect example of how thinking about those things will help you answer questions. So the author introduces the idea of, and it's all about what the author says saying no is about. If you read through all of these answers, all of these interpretations of what saying no means is touched upon in the text. She does find saying no being scary, but she also does find some power in being able to do it. She does talk about how saying no can come with a lot of guilt because it represents not doing your part in social justice advocacy, and it's linked to that. She does talk about, similar to that, the idea of receiving opportunities being a privilege, regardless of whether you want them. And she also does say saying no is easier as you do it more. So I'm like, okay, the question can't just be asking, what does it mention in the text? Because all of these are true. So it says, so I'm wondering, what is the most important idea in the text that the author wants to convey? And that's really the key to this question. The reason why she's writing this is because she thinks that there's a lot of guilt and toxicity in this space that people attach to saying no. When someone from a more marginalized community says no, they have all this extra guilt because it's become attached to letting people down in a social justice sense. So that is why, out of all of the different things that she discusses about this, that idea is the most important for her to put forward, because it drives the whole purpose of the text. So that's why B is correct. Does that make sense to people? Again, unmute, thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, I can only see like a few people on my screen, so I'm just going to assume that you're going great. Okay. Now, I have a little bit of time if you want to ask me some specific questions about this one or any of the other questions, or any general approaches or tips to approach different texts if you want. And just unmute or send it as a PM or just in the chat.
I feel like for me, oftentimes I really boil down to like two options, and then I somehow
I
always
guess
choose
I
like,
was just going to ask Sana if you were to give, I guess, like one top tip or technique to someone who had done this and was just sort of starting out with section 1 in relation to the text that we've done tonight, what would you recommend?
Okay, I heard someone asking a question and then I heard Sarah cut them off, so I will answer both. To answer Sarah's question, number one takeaway is in all of section 1 questions, no matter what the text is, always think about what is the essential meaning of this text. If you had to put it into one word or one sentence, what is it saying? That will really help you, and that's the lens you should be approaching everything with. Was it Isabel that asked the question? Can you ask it again?
yeah, no, because like I was just generally when I was like doing practice, like I always boil down to like two options. And then I'll be like, okay, I have a 50% chance of getting it right, but I always like get it wrong. So I just don't know how can I, really improve the chances of getting it right.
Yeah, just getting that final stretch. Okay, first of all, I'm going to put it out there. If you can already narrow it down just to two options, you're already like doing well. Like you're already most of the way there, because that means you actually understand what the text is and you can rule out other options. Now, in terms of choosing between two like pretty good options, my advice would be, once you've gotten to that point, look at the text and look for evidence for each of those answers. And often like one will be more correct than the other because it simply has more within the text that relates to it and supports that. And so often with the GAMSAT section 1, it'll be about what is the most supported answer? What is the main focus? So that will help you narrow that down. And I know it's frustrating, but this is all just about learning what the GAMSAT is looking for. And that's how they write the questions, and that's how they can justify telling you this is a more right or wrong answer. So you just look for those justifications yourself as well.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. And there was a question in the chat. Do you normally read the phrase first or the question first? You can do it either way. For me personally, I read the text first because I always just want to fix in my mind what is the main meaning, etc. I find if I read the question first, I might read like one of the different answers and go on like a little bit like a red herring trail where I'm like, oh, I'm looking for things just related to that. And then I might forget to also look, and then I might notice something in like one specific part of the text that relates to that. And then I might forget to look at the whole rest of the text and see, oh, does it actually talk about something else as well though? So I like reading it before I like reading the text before the questions. But honestly, it's just about figuring out what strategy works for you. So my advice would be to try it both ways, see which works better. Okay, from Keith. And Sarah, just tell me to stop answering these questions if we run out of time.
You're all good. Keep going.
Okay. So from Keith, how do you narrow your choice if you're not familiar with the vocabulary of some options? Yeah, so this is a really good question. So I'm really glad you brought that up. It's understandably something that honestly everyone could be nervous about because no one knows every single word in the English language. And I think you can also find comfort in that because everyone who sits the GAMSAT, even people who do well on it, they won't know every single word in the GAMSAT test that they sat, and that's okay. What you can do is you can gather the rough meaning of the word from the context. So my main piece of advice is not to be thrown by a word you don't understand, but think, okay, in this sentence generally, what does I think it means? And so that's the best way to approach that. And you can do well in the GAMSAT through doing that. Okay. Sarah. Oh, okay, cool. Sarah's just giving extra advice in the chat, so be sure to read the bonus director's cut over there. Okay, what's the difference between a monologue and a blog? Okay, so a monologue is more, think of it as like your friend going on a rant. Like they're just like, it's like just what's going on in their head. It's a bit less unstructured. They're just like sort of talking it through. So that's why in the text, so this is more related to the Roxanne Gay text, yeah. So in the text, you can find like more ellipses, like ... personally I am ... and like I feel this sort of, I don't know, yeah. So it's sort of just they're ranting, they're monologuing, they're just like spewing out their thoughts. A blog can be very personal, so it's the option that's most similar to a monologue, but think of it as like, it's a bit more structured. People have thought a bit more about it. They've edited a bit and then they've posted it. One way that I like to think about it is if I could picture an ad being inserted in it, or like, you know, like doing some promo or marketing on like a blog or whatever, then like it might suit more of a blog style than a monologue. Does that help? Okay, I'm just going to assume that it's good. Message me in the chat if you want more explanation. Okay. From Bolo Bao, sorry if I stuffed up your name. What are the most effective ways to practice this section? I didn't score too well in the mock. Okay, first of all, don't worry that you didn't score too well in the mock. Section 1 is really teachable. So take a lot of heart in that. And so what are the most effective ways to practice this section? Okay, I think first I'll go through a bit of the ways that are unhelpful that people might use. People might learn a lot of vocabulary. People might read a lot of random poems. And neither of these things help as much, because the chances are that whether that specific thing you study will pop up in the GAMSAT is pretty low. So it's not about thinking, okay, I'm going to prepare to understand like this specific text before it. It's about learning techniques that you can use to approach text types that you can apply in every scenario, no matter what specific text they put in front of you. So my advice would be to figure out for each text type what sort of strategies work for you, and use study time to figure that out. And as part of like the GAMSAT course, we go through different techniques that you can try out and find what does and doesn't work for you. Yep.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sana. Thank you for going through section 1, and also thanks everyone for your questions. If you do have more questions for Sana, she'll put her Halad email. Yes, claps all round. She did amazing. She'll put her Halad email in the chat for you, and you're more than welcome to email her and or me and just ask any questions that come up as you go. And yes, absolutely love what Jack's just put in the chat as well. For those who are listening to the recording, some of the other things that were put in the chat where Jack just put in, reflection is important to improving in section 1. Reflect on your mistakes. Try to utilize techniques to combat these, especially if they're related to certain text types. I was able to improve my section 1 score considerably doing this. Yes, and so 100% would just like to drive home what Sana and Jack have both said, is that techniques for section 1 and section 3 as well, but section 1 can be really defined by the different text types. So tonight, if this is sort of your first time working with section 1, then tonight you saw 2 different text types, so a compilation of comments, and one of them had a sneaky poem in there as well. And then you saw very much a non-fiction factual text type with that monologue. So Sana gave you a couple of techniques. What you will notice is lots of different text types in section 1 will lend themselves to different techniques more or less. So spend some time working through what kinds of techniques can help you, and what works for your friend might not work well for you. So you really have to spend time with that, and then just do practice questions. So we'll make sure that we email out some things you can practice with after tonight's mini mock as well. And there's a lot of other mini mocks that you can work through on our YouTube channel, masterclasses, and you can just practice questions and practice techniques. And I'll tell you a little bit about our courses at the end as well, just in case that's something you might be interested in. So yep, feel free to email, feel free to let us know what your questions are too. So we'll take a breather for 2 seconds while I set up and grab the next links, because that was a lot of information, and well done for giving it a go. And while I grab them as well, this is literally step 1, first port of call for a lot of you. So don't stress about what mark you got on that. Just pat on the back for giving it a go. So I'm going to put in these in the chat. So we're going to switch gears to section 2. Section 2 is very different to sections 1 and 3. Sorry if this is repetitive for anyone who's sat it before, but you'll see that the link that has the prompt has a set of quotes. I think this one has 5. You'll get 4 to 5 quotes or comments, and there'll be a similar sort of theme or idea that links them all together. Your job is to write a response to them. You can write your response in any style that you like, and you can use as many or as little of the quotes as you want to. You don't have to write about the quotes at all. They just need to link into the overall theme. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. Just have a go writing something tonight. We're only going to give you 20 minutes. Usually you would have 30 to 35 minutes to plan and to write. So what I would encourage you doing is just start writing, and wherever you get up to is where you get up to tonight. Or you can write an introduction or like a starting part, a middle part, and an end part, and sort of like a condensed version. So completely up to you. Or you can write a plan and do some dot points. So just have a go with the task tonight. After that, unfortunately, Grace isn't able to make it, so I'll go through some tips for section 2 overall. We'll look at some samples that you guys have written, and then also we'll have some time for you to ask your questions. So if that sounds all good, if you can just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat or a nod or whatever, that the links are working and that you're able to see those prompts, and then I will get up the timer again and we'll be good to go. Cool. We've got some thumbs. Terrific. All right. Oh, I clicked start on the timer already. Okay, great. And you can start. Great. Okay. So good job, everyone, just for giving it a go, or even if all you did was had a look at the prompt and just thought through it. I don't really mind. This is just a chance for you to get a bit of advice, some feedback, a go with a prompt in real time, and I'm happy with whatever you came up with. So I wanted to spend about 5-ish minutes first just going through some tips and going through the prompt in general. If you have questions as I go through, please just pop them in the chat or shout out or whatnot. And then after that, I'll go through some of the samples of some things that you guys wrote. So I'm just going to share the screen. Okay. So firstly, for those of you who've sat the GAMSAT before, this part will be a little bit repetitive. You probably know some of this before from previous, but just wanted to catch everyone up to speed. So firstly, this is very similar to a set of comments that you could get on the GAMSAT, and there'll be a task A and a task B. There's lots of little nitty gritty things about the difference between tasks A and B, but for now, all I want you to know is that there'll be a set of quotes for each one, and you'll have to write both of them within 65 or maybe it's 70 minutes. Check your GAMSAT guide. And so what your job is to read each one and work out what the overall prompt or the overall theme is about that they'd like you to write on. So here you've got 5 quotes, and I find it helpful to just read each one and ask myself what each one roughly is about, what it means to me. You don't have to go crazy depth at this point, but just overall, what do I think it's about? And then I put the 4 or 5 together and go, what's it about overall? The reason why that's important is you don't want to get so caught up on one of the quotes that you accidentally write on the wrong topic, but you can use a more niche quote to inspire the direction that you take. So for example, this comment here talks about a nervous silence loosens tongues. I could read into this quote too much and go, oh, I want to talk about silence, and then write an amazing piece about silence, and I've kind of missed the overall point of all of the quotes. So you need to understand that out of these quotes, you needed to pick up on fear and doubts as the main overall topic. But then if you wanted to talk about nervous silence, loosening tongues in the context of fear, you definitely can if you found that particularly inspiring. So firstly, find out the overall theme. Secondly, find out what direction you would like to take. So that's what I want to talk about next. How do I know what to do when this is a really open task and there are so many directions that I can take it? So I've got a couple of tips for you, and my advice, and I guess it's very similar to the advice we gave for section 1. My advice is spend time with section 2 trying different things and working out what's working for me, what's weighing me down, what's taking too long. You'll find your own approach, but I'm going to talk to you about a specific approach today that I find helpful. So the first, I like to ask myself 4 questions. So the first thing I ask myself after I've worked out the prompt, so here I've worked out the prompt is fear. The first thing I ask myself is, what do I think about this prompt? And that becomes my contention, so, or my thesis, or my key sort of overall idea for it. So what do I think about the prompt? The second thing I ask myself is, why is this prompt important to me? So why do I think that? And then that thing will form my first idea or my first paragraph, my first point. The third thing I ask myself is, why does this matter more broadly? That will become my next idea or my next point paragraph. And the fourth question I ask myself is, going forward, what would I change or want to see differently? And then this would either be my final paragraph, or I would, if I wanted to write a third one, or if I had the time to write a third one, or if I don't, then that will become sort of a conclusive summing everything together statement. So that's obviously a more traditional essay structure. You don't have to write a traditional essay, but you could even ask yourself those questions just to get sort of your ideas going and just to give you a bit of an idea of where things are sitting in terms of your ideas and the prompt itself and the topic. So while you guys were writing that, I actually did my own just to give you an example of those questions happening, and just sort of I didn't write a piece, I just wrote a plan. So I'm going to share my plan with you and you can see how. Can you please repeat the third question? Yes, absolutely. And also when you're doing section 3, and I've got a bit of breathing time, I'll put them all in the chat for you. So the third question is, why does it matter more broadly, or just in general, or to how does it apply to society, that sort of thing. So I put up the top that the topic is fear and doubt. And so that first question, sorry, I wrote them down so that they were cohesive. The first question, what do I think about the prompt? The first thing that I really thought was fear affects people beyond surface level, and that fear drives them to heightened and potentially pathological responses to things. That's what I thought of sort of first and majorly, and really stuck with me. The second question is, why is this important to me? And I thought the reason why this is important to me is because experiences that I've had and that I've seen in other people is that people become fearful of something as a natural response to an unsafe situation. And so it's just normal for people to be fearful. So that's become my first paragraph. And I'm actually going to talk about a really deep topic with this one. I'm going to talk about abuse, and I'm going to have a discussion about how we naturally respond to stressful and unsafe situations such as abuse through fear. I'm going to come back to writing on emotional and denser topics in a minute, but as you can see, I've gone for a more dense approach. You definitely don't have to do that. So that's question 2. Why is it important to me? Because I've had touch points with seeing things like this happen. Question 3, how does it matter more broadly? This one I've taken a more scientific angle because I wanted to link it to this. So I guess this one I've sort of broken my rule a bit because I didn't go and look into society as much as maybe typically I would. But I put the reason why it matters is because people then in their worlds and in their lives perceive a harmless stimulus as something that's not harmless, that is harmful, as an altered mechanism and as a way to protect themselves. And I thought, and I'm going to discuss sort of how people's personal lives and the world around them is impacted by a harmless stimulus because of their previous experiences. And I thought about a medical condition I know about as an example, which is called allodynia. And that's when people perceive pain when actually something isn't supposed to be painful. So maybe a touch on the hand makes someone feel pain. And I also thought of a book I've read, The Body Keeps the Score, by a doctor which actually talks about the way that our bodies hold on to and also have a sort of pathological response to stressful and harmful events in the past, including abuse. So I could link back to my first paragraph. And then my fourth question, was going forward, what would I change or want to see differently? And I thought, you know what I really want to see is I want to see a community where we create safer spaces for people whose lives have become overrun by fears and by their previous experiences. And that includes more structured things like education in schools and therapy and things like that. But it also includes more laid back things or more casual things, such as having discussions and it being normal to discuss these things. And my examples, I had this Brene Brown quote. If anyone knows Brene Brown, she's amazing. This quote that I loved about that suppressed experiences are like a cancer, they metastasize. And I remembered that quote and I thought, yeah, we can't keep suppressing these things. It perpetuates the fear. And so then to wrap it all up, I thought in conclusion, I would say, let's stop making people feel bad for their fears and instead take their trauma seriously. So that would be my overall sort of how to work through those 4 ideas to get this cohesive piece about fear. So could you, yeah, no worries. I just got a question in the chat, but I think that that's all being covered. So obviously, this isn't like you must write exactly what I wrote. This is how I thought through those questions for myself so that I could get to my piece. And as you can see, I've got a clear idea that I really just wanted to talk about this aspect of fear. Obviously, people have other fears. I'm absolutely deathly terrified of snakes, and I could have talked about that and how ridiculous and unreasonable it was to have that fear and gone through that, but I didn't feel like talking about that. I felt like talking about this because this matters to me. So think about that. What matters to me in terms of this prompt? Okay, so we have a question. If the theme is not that obvious, can you use multiple themes in the essay, both fear and doubt? Absolutely. And I also could have used doubt. And you can see I haven't really touched on doubt here. In this set of quotes, both fear and doubt sort of are leveled equally. So you can talk about one or both. Yeah, one of them, either one or both. So yes, sometimes it will be that there's a couple, and that's totally fine as well. Things that I like to tell people is it's just a prompt. You do need to recognize what the theme is and make sure you answer to it, but it's just a prompt and you can take it where you would like to. They want to hear what you have to say about the prompt. So feel free to keep sending your questions in. What I'm going to do is just pause for a second so I can pull up one of the samples of what some of you guys have written. So just bear with me for a second and I'm just going to copy one over. That's not the document I wanted. There we go. All right. Oh, I forgot to check if this person was happy for me to share theirs. Sorry. Because I wouldn't want to share one if you don't want me to. Okay, good. Oh, great question about examples. What I'll get you all to do is I'll share this sample and get you to read it. And then after you've read it, I'll answer that question and any other questions that crop up. So just share the screen. All right, so we have a sample here. Does it all fit on one page? It does. Amazing. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to read it, and then I'm going to give some feedback on it and sort of show you some examples throughout. And then any questions, just feel free to shout out or put them in the chat as we go. Okay. Just make sure I can still see everyone's chat. Cool. It's a bit of a juggling act, fitting everything on my screen. Okay, so great. Well done as well to this person for writing so much. It means you did a plan and wrote all of this in the 20 minutes. Fantastic. So firstly, I'm going to point out some things that hopefully can also bring together what I was talking to all of you about. So they've done more of a traditional essay structure, which is great. Doesn't matter find out what works for you. And it's very clear in the introduction that they knew it was about fear. They've given you a little bit of a snapshot into fear itself and what they've sort of defined fear in their idea and in their lens and gone, this is what fear means to me. Fear happens when we don't know what's going on. We're afraid of things because they're the unknown. So they've really set up what fear is. And then they've said, thus we begin to ask, why do we have fear and how do we overcome this obstacle? So this to me is like or I'm not entirely sure. I think that this is their contention, or this is like, I'm going to tell you what fear is and how we overcome it, why we have fear and how we overcome it. And so then what I did like was that they've sort of broken up their essay into paragraph 1 is what is fear to them, and paragraph 2 is how to overcome the fear. So I thought this paragraph here was excellent, that it was overcome fear through courage, and that courage, and you probably know the quote, courage is not the absence of fear. And so they've sort of lent into that idea, whether intentionally or not. And I thought that was really great. I think this paragraph is a tiny bit confusing, probably not intended. I also did really like the example of the Wright brothers, and I'm just going to go over a couple of things with that. So firstly, I guess I was expecting a why do we have fear paragraph, because that was here. But honestly, I think you've already kind of answered that, because here you've sort of said we have fear because it's something unknown. So you could probably reword this with, thus we begin to ask, like, how can fear be unhelpful and how can we overcome this obstacle? That might be a more helpful sort of contention for you to write, because that then leans better into what you wrote about in this paragraph. And you basically wrote, having fear would be unhelpful because sometimes fears are just elusive and they're unnecessary and they prevent us from things. And the Wright brothers, because they were able to ignore fears, or not, they didn't really have fears, then they were able to not be confined by this box. So I think I liked this paragraph, but I think it felt a little bit like, I was like, I'm not really sure exactly what you want to say in this paragraph. And it's probably just like cleaning up the exact purpose of the paragraph. And so saying something more along the lines of, sometimes fear is unhelpful and it holds us back, it confines us into a box, and maybe putting that up at the start here. So sometimes we are confined into a box by our fears, and or by fears that are just an illusion. And so like take the example of the Wright brothers, because they were able to withstand the things that usually would stop, or were able to push past the things that would usually stop someone out of fear, they then were able to develop a fully functional plane, which is like amazing. And then we go into here that go, well, how can we challenge our own fears? Through courage. And then it leads through there. So I think the reason why that's important is otherwise this paragraph reads a little bit like dismissive of people having fears. And fears, as you've mentioned correctly up here, fear is like a natural thing that we experience. So just a general sort of tip for everyone, especially because we're so time pressured in this task, it's easy to write very finite statements and very factual statements accidentally. So things like fear is an illusion, it's an illusion of uncertainty. And they accidentally can come across as saying we shouldn't ever have fears, or it's bad to have fears or things, when I know that's not what you're saying. So write statements such as, fear can be an illusion, when we don't actually consider whether it's helpful or unhelpful, or when we don't think about our fears, or when we don't try to challenge them. So you can sort of have less finite statements, and then that way you don't sound as direct and as sort of scary to the person who's reading it. Because someone reading this might be like me, might be like, oh, but I'm terrified of snakes. Are you saying that like I'm living in an illusion? When obviously you're not saying that. So having little ways that you know how to write statements that are still compelling, but aren't saying things directly that could like not offend someone, but make them feel like they're being boxed in, is a really helpful way for you to get your points across. Otherwise, I loved it. And I hope everyone can see how clear this structure is, because they've gone fear, like positives, negatives, what I think fear is, and then they've gone overcoming fear, which is very similar to the 4-question model that I gave you, with contention, or what do I think, and then a point, another point, and then a what can we do next. So very similar structure. I'm just going to pause there. I will say as well, we have quite a few, and I'll make sure to send them in the email after tonight's event, but we have quite a few resources on different ways that you can structure section 2, because this isn't the only way to do it. I just sort of gave you one suggestion tonight, so you can feel free to sort of peruse those and go through them in your own time after this evening. But I do have a question here in the chat. How important is it to include specific examples? And I think that this is a great sample also to show that, because they do have a very specific example of the Wright brothers and them building the planes. So firstly, if you're going to use a specific example, that's fantastic, and it definitely adds sort of levity and it adds evidence to your piece. But you do need to explain it. So when I first read this, I was like, who the heck are the Wright brothers? And I got really confused. And then I pieced it together because, as you wrote in a very lovely way, developed a fully functional plane. And I was like, okay. And that's just my lack of world knowledge, but don't expect that the person reading your piece will necessarily know your niche interests or your examples. So make sure you spell them out. So yes, and this is a perfect question as well. How do we embed factual versus personal examples, words and phrases, and especially for abstract task B prompts? Because yes, 100% agree that examples vary greatly, and that in a task B prompt, for those who aren't aware, task A tends to have more sort of like socio-cultural sort of prompts, or it will have like maybe a political prompt, things like that. Task B tends to be more emotive. There is still quite a bit of crossover, but people tend to write about more personal things in task B. I'll give you a couple of different phrases in a second, but just to go back to your question about do we need to include specific examples, it really depends on the style you're writing in. So if you're writing a more structured essay like this, the simple answer is yes, you do need specific examples, but the way that you use those depends. So with my piece or like example plan that I showed you, that book that I mentioned, The Body Keeps the Score, that's quite a dense example. There's a lot in that book and there are a lot of ideas, and it's quite a complex book. So if I wanted, I could actually use the same book as my whole example throughout and match that, or like sort of mesh that with the example or overall less specific example of someone suffering abuse. And that would be more than sufficient, because it shows that I understand how it connects to the real world. So there's no need for you to have one specific example per paragraph just for the sake of it. But if you do have like sort of a specific example here and there, or you have one that sort of gets carried through, that definitely adds to your piece. Saying that, sometimes the most effective pieces actually do have a personal example instead. Obviously, that comes with you being willing to put yourself out there and potentially put something that makes you feel very raw and vulnerable. So it's not necessary, it's completely your call. If you put a personal example, you then might not have to put a specific example, but you do need to write how that is still applicable to the greater world, so that it's not just me, me, me. So some examples of how do we sort of put our personal examples in there. You can either just say it and use first person. So this is a bit different to, I guess, high school or uni, where it's like, no, you can't write in first person. You can just go out there and say it, like, this happened to me, this is my story, etc. Or you can put it in more like, some people experience it this way, or there was once a person or a girl who blah, 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 and say it that way. Or you can say like, you know, a personal example relating to this concept is blah, 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 and say it like that. So don't be afraid of it sounding more simple or a little clunky. We don't care how it sounds. We just want to hear what you have to say and why you have to say it. So don't stress about it sounding beautiful and cohesive. How do we break our thesis into specific topic sentences without repeating your thesis? Yeah, great question. So firstly, you can repeat your thesis if you want to, but I would recommend not, because I want to hear why you have that thesis. So state your thesis in the introduction and then tell me why you have that thesis. So how do we break it into specific topic sentences? You give me 2 or 3 reasons why that's your thesis. So if my thesis is that fear, I might as well re-say the one that I had, that fear affects people beyond the surface, then I should give you 3 reasons, or 2 to 3 reasons why it affects people beyond the surface, or how it affects. So you get those questions of who, what, when, where, why, and probably it's mainly the what and the why and the how that you would be using for those. So have like your reasons why you think that thesis. Yeah. just building on your comment of not worrying about if it sounds clunky, is this section more about the ideas we have, not necessarily how we communicate them? Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for asking that. And that is correct. So that's why it's so open to any style you like. I know that tonight I haven't touched on creative writing styles, but we do have that in our section 2 workshop recording that I can send you all a link to. But it's more, we care more about what you have to say than how you say it. And some of the best section 2 pieces I've read have actually been the simplest. So don't stress about grammar, spelling, wording, sophistication, anything like that. I just care about your ideas. There is a part where ASA says that one of their criteria is sort of the flow and the language. That's not actually the sophistication. It's actually more like, as I read it, did it make sense? Like, was I able to follow, or was I like, what the heck is going on? I have no idea what's happening. That's literally all they're asking for. So don't stress so much about that, which is nice, because then you can just write your ideas instead of worrying about all the little nitty-gritty things. Does anyone have any other questions before we shake it up again and move on to section 3? Cool. All right. So
can I add on a bit of advice regarding the last 2 questions? So how do we break our thesis into specific topic sentences without repeating your thesis? The way that I think about this is each paragraph builds on the next one, and it builds the argument. And so I think of it in terms of like, if you wrote each of the topic sentences as like an argument, and then like together, what is your conclusion that you draw from all those 3 or whatever, that would be your overall thesis. And so if you're thinking in that very structured and logic way that actually hits the point that ACE is looking for in terms of like how you're expressing your ideas, where they just want to see the logical flow and the build of those ideas rather than see you using really fancy words or whatever.
Yes, thank you so much, Sana. Yeah, 100% agree. And I'll leave it there because that was fantastic advice. And we just have one more question. How often should you practice writing an essay? So this is like, how long is a piece of string? I know people hate like when you get those kinds of answers. Personally, what did I do? I wrote 2 essays a week. I found that helpful. But honestly, what I've found over time, the most helpful thing is when you write an essay, don't just leave it. Don't just file it away. Get your friend to read it. Get your mum to read it. Put it in to get marked. There's some great Facebook groups you can go on where people read and share advice on their essays. Join some of them. And after you get feedback, apply it. One of the most frustrating things for me is my students giving me an essay. I give them my time and energy to give them really helpful feedback. And then they write me the same thing the next week. And I'm like, you didn't listen. So it doesn't really matter how often or how much, it matters how much you're taking on each time. So even if it's just one task A and one task B once a week, or maybe even once a fortnight, and you just get really good reflection out of that and get really good feedback on that, and then you put it into the next time, that is the way to do well in this section, not so much churning it out. So I guess in a more simple term, quality over quantity, but that would be the way to do it. Amazing. And I'm just going to read out for anyone on the recording from Jack. Thank you so much. That is so sweet. Hey everyone, just wanted to preface section 3 by emphasizing the importance of a positive mindset. Section 3 is the last section. You're probably tired. I'm tired. And it can be particularly cumbersome and feared, but try to avoid going in with a negative mindset, such as it's too hard, I hate section 3. Go in with, I can do it, I'm going to smash section 3 mindset, and that can make a world of difference. So yes, thank you, Jack, and 100% agree. And I know section 3 is a lot for almost everyone. Some people love it, but it is a lot. So for those who haven't done section 3 before, it's more like section 1. You'll get some units, some prompts, and they'll be about some topics, and then you'll have to answer the questions. It does seem quite science heavy and quite prior knowledge heavy. There is some expected prior knowledge. Jack will touch on some of that in his explanations, but also it's reasoning based, and they're mainly focusing on your reasoning. So even if you look at it and you're like, what the heck, just give it a go tonight. It'll be the same thing. I'll send you a set of questions and then you'll be able to answer them on the Google form. So take a deep breath. Almost done. And I'm just going to get the links for you. All right. And if I can just get a thumbs up in the chat when you've got those. And similar to the question I was asked before about timing, this is the same. You'll have 20 minutes, so 2 minutes per question in section 3. So we'll give you 20 minutes for the 10 questions. So it's roughly accurate to how much time you would get for a set of questions like this. And hopefully, also my timer seemed to be glitching a little bit in the last one. So if you want to set your own timer, by all means do that so that you don't have a freak out when suddenly there's like a minute to go and you didn't realize. Okay, maybe I should organize a timer app for next time. All right, and we got some thumbs up, so you guys can start. Okay, terrific. So we're going to pass on to Jack now, and he's going to run through some things to do with the section 3 you just did. And please just continue to shout out or put questions in the chat as he goes along. Awesome.
Well, good. I'll take it from here. I hope everyone enjoyed that. Section 3 can be particularly daunting. So I personally think that with section 3, the 2 hardest things are firstly, understanding what the hell the STEM is saying. And secondly, understanding what the question is asking you. So the GAMSAT questions like to be a bit ambiguous. So you do want to define a problem, and you do want to sort of make sense of the STEM. So essentially, when I go through a STEM, what I like to do is I don't read the STEM in its entirety. I focus on what's important. So you might be asking like, what's important, what's not important. I sort of boil down what's important to 3 key things. So the first thing would be sort of, I guess, properties or characteristics that come up in the STEM. So for example, in the first STEM, it would be copper has an oxidation state of 2+. That's an important characteristic. So make note of something like that. That's a key characteristic to pay attention to. Another thing would be sort of processes and mechanisms. So this hasn't really occurred in this STEM, but that's something that occurs in biology. So you might get a flow chart, and you may have some important information within the STEM related to that flow chart. And a third thing, what do I mean by STEM? So essentially what I mean by STEM is the big chunk of text you get before the question, if that makes sense. So that's pretty much from Sarco, can't pronounce the word, I'll just say Sarco, to coordination numbers 4 to 6. So essentially that's the STEM there. And the last thing is any sort of rules or caveats. So this could be, if X happens, then Y is likely to happen. Or this could be, if X is true, then Y can't be true. So pay attention to those types of things. So if we look at the first problem, I'll share my screen. Give me a second. Sorry, let's look at the questions that were answered most. So question 1 and question 3. Can everyone see my screen on the question? Yep, all good. Okay, so essentially, when I went through the STEM myself, I identified sort of 3 main things that were important. So the first thing was that, I'm just going to call it Sarco because I can't pronounce it. Sarco is used to chelate and deliver radioactive copper. So essentially, what's important is like that doesn't make sense to me personally. Like that's just some weird sciencey stuff. So I try to dumb it down as much as you can. So essentially, Sarco just transports radioactive copper around the body. That's all you need to know. You don't need to understand what a bicyclic cage-like molecule is. You don't understand what chelating is. You don't really need to understand what radioactive is at this point. A second bit of information that I found to be important was also copper 64. So for those who don't know, when a 64 is at the top there, it just describes the atomic mass. And atomic mass is number of protons and number of neutrons, which will be very important for answering question 1. And the third thing that I identified as being important is that copper has an oxidation state of +2. So if we know what oxidation is the loss of electrons. And given that it has a +2 at the front, at the end, it means it's lost 2 electrons. So sort of those are the 3 main key points to take away from this very sciencey and can be daunting text. So if you go to the first problem, again, the problem itself is rather daunting, because it's saying which of the following corresponds to the arrangement of subatomic particles in the radioactive copper using the Sarka complexes. So when you get to a section 3 question, it's important to redefine a question in the way you understand. So you look at the options, it's talking about protons, neutrons, electrons. So what it's essentially asking to do is how many protons, how many neutrons, and how many electrons does copper have? So it doesn't require you to have some background knowledge of copper, but it does require, unfortunately, some assumed knowledge in the sense that you require a simple understanding of atomic structure. So if we look at the question here, give me a second. We can see that copper has an atomic mass of 64, right there, and it has a +2 oxidation state. So if we go to the question, we know that copper has a 64 atomic mass. So this means the number of protons plus the number of neutrons has to equal 64. From then, we can immediately eliminate any option where the number of protons and neutrons doesn't equal 64. So if you look through them, the first one is 64. The second one is not 64, so you can rule out that option. Option C is 64, and option D is also 64. Okay, so we've eliminated one option, we've gotten closer. So the next thing we want to do is use the other bit of information we have. Copper has an oxidation state of +2. So normally, again, some assumed knowledge, normally in a stable molecule that it's not charged, the number of protons is equal to the number of electrons. However, we're told that copper is in the +2 state, which means it has lost 2 electrons. So we're looking for an option where the number of electrons are 2 less than the number of protons. We look at the first option, we can rule that out. We'll look at option D, we can rule that out as well. Therefore, the answer is option C. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense. So, yep, all good. We'll go to question 3, which is another one that was frequently skipped. So it's asking us, again, define what the problem is. It's saying what mass of this drug should be administered. So again, some assumed knowledge here, but it's not some complex information. All you need to know is the equation for mole. The equation for mole is N equals M divided by MR. Apologies for my handwriting, it's very disgusting, I don't know. So once you know this equation, you have the mole, and you technically have the molar mass. Yeah, so we know the mole is, let me rub that out. So to work out the molar mass, we know the molar mass of copper. And the question here is referring to the complex. Fortunately for us, we're given a complex here. So with bond line drawing, whenever you're given a bond line drawing, any corner like this is assumed to be a carbon atom. Any any atom that is bonded to a carbon that is not hydrogen is identified. So that's the nitrogen and the hydrogen here. And then there's also the implied hydrogens on the carbon. So there's sort of a couple of rules to know when you encounter a question with bond line drawing. So there's 2 hydrogens here, there's 2 hydrogens here, there's 2 hydrogens here, and whatnot. So based on that, you're able to sort of identify a formula for this question. Give me a second. Let me try to work it out real quickly. So it's C14. H32 N6 and copper. So once we've identified sort of the semi-structural formula for this, the next step is to convert that into molar mass. So again, I know someone asked a question about the periodic table, whether you're meant to know it, whether you're not meant to know it. Unfortunately, there are occasions where you will get questions where you're required to know the major elements, so your carbon, your nitrogen, your oxygen, and your hydrogen. So you're meant to know sort of the atomic masses of the key important ones. So a good rule of guide is usually the first row on the periodic table, have a general understanding of those, be able to recall them, because sometimes you're given them, sometimes you're not, and you don't want to go in there and leave it to chance. So we know for carbon, the molar mass is 14. So let's put this here. Now for hydrogen, it's equal to 1. Nitrogen, sorry, carbon's 12. Oops, even I make mistakes. And nitrogen is 14. We're given the one for copper, and copper is 64. So if we add all this together, so 14 times 12 plus 32 hydrogens, which is atomic mass of 1, and then 6 nitrogens, which have an atomic mass of 14, and then the 1 copper, which is 64. If you add up all together, we get 348. And that is a very ugly number to work with. So feel free to round it up to the next whole number, so 350. So now we have the mole and we have the molar mass. And we can use the equation for the mole. So it's 350. So as we said like before, the equation is m divided by mr, and we want to work it out for mass. So we've got to rearrange this equation by bringing this over here. The way to do that is to multiply this side by mr to undo that, which gets you mass equals n times mr, which means the equation to be 0.02 times 350. Another important skill to sort of bear in mind in section 3 is be able to interconvert between decimals and fractions, and back and forth, as well as interconverting with ratios. So that's a key math skill that's very important for section 3, because trying to work out 0.02 times 350 without a calculator can be very hard. I can't do that. So what you do is you can convert it into a, let me just make this a room on the side. You can convert the 0.02 into a fraction by doing this. So you got 0.02. So you get the number, which is a 2, the first non-zero number, and you divide it by the place value. So what the place value is so here is 1/10. Here is 1/100th. I don't know if that makes sense for everyone. Does that make sense, that process? Yeah. So that means because it's in the second decimal place, it's over 100. So it's 2 over 100. You simplify that to 1 over 50. So that makes it a hell of a lot easier to go 150 times 350 over 1. Because then you just use your fraction laws, where you multiply the first number, the denominators. So 1 times 350, which is 350. And then 50 times 1, which is 50. Then you simplify that. How many times does 50 go into 350? 7 times. And that's our answer, 7 grams. I don't know if does that make sense for everyone? How I got the answer there? We're sort of running out of time, actually over time. So I'll probably try to field questions from everyone because it is a very daunting section. So if I can answer someone's questions and leave them a little bit, I'll try to do that. No questions?
Feel free to point out some things from the other one if you want to, Jack, like even just some pointers for the STEM. If
Question
you want to.
8.
That's okay. Yeah,
Give me
up
a
to you.
second, Oscar. No, because I just thought I was over time. I didn't want
No,
to
you're
keep
all
anyone
good.
longer than I have to be.
Yeah, if people are like exhausted and want to yeet out, that's okay. But yeah, feel free to give a couple pointers for that one if you want to.
Okay, so question 8. So again, this can seem like a very sciencey section, like STEM. You may think that you need to know the ins and outs of the cardiovascular system, but you really don't need to do that. So if you sort of read the stem again, try to focus on the important things and try to dumb down any characteristics or any important things as much as you can. So to sort of, I guess, dumb it, or how I dumb it down is I try to contextualize the information in this into like a picture. So for me, when I'm reading this, it says the heart is made up of 4 chambers, 2 atria, 2 ventricle, on the left and right side of the heart. The heart fills with the blood during diastole, so that's a key thing. So diastole, you write down filling. And then, where was I? Yeah, and the partly empties during systole. So systole, we write down, again, sorry about my ridiculously ugly handwriting. Systole is emptying plus contraction. So the movement of the blood in the heart is made possible due to heart valves, some of which include the aortic and mitral valves, which also allow blood to flow into the left ventricle. So that's a very wordy sentence, but we're talking about left ventricle here. So it says it's allowing blood to flow out the left ventricle. So these are 2 valves. If no one knows what valves are essentially just openings in the heart that allow blood to flow from one direction to another. So based on that, we know we can sort of conceptualize this information into the left valve and draw it like this. Sorry, like that. Give me a second. So we're talking 2 valves. We don't know which one's which yet, but it's regulating flow of blood through the left ventricle. So blood's flowing like that. That's all you know at this stage. So try to sort of conceptualize the information as much as you can. The flow and pressure within the left ventricle can be measured in the left ventricle pressure volume loop, which is shown in here. So this figure here. Pressure is lowest in the LV during diastole and is maximum during systole. So essentially from this single sentence, we're able to identify that systole is around here, because it's saying it's a peak in pressure. If you look at here, this is pressure. And we're able to identify here is diastole. So once we've gone this, it says during diastole, the mitral valve is open. So what is diastole again? Diastole is filling. Which side is filling? It's coming from here. So we can then know that the mitral valve is here. Then we read on and says aortic valve is open during this systole. So we know that blood flow is flowing through the aortic valve here. So with that, just reading the stem and trying to sort of conceptualize information, we've been able to get a rough understanding of what on earth is happening here. Obviously, having an understanding of the cardiovascular system will be heaps quicker, but you don't necessarily need to know much here in order to conceptualize really. So if we go to question 8, a patient with systolic heart failure has an inability to contract their heart sufficiently to eject blood into circulation. To compensate, the body is likely to increase which of the following factors? So again, reread this problem. So define a problem. What is it asking me? So it's saying the heart can't contract properly. What does this mean? If the heart can't contract properly, we're not pumping enough blood through circulation. So how are we going to compensate to overcome this? So you sort of, I guess, work through each of the answer options and try to think which one's plausible, which isn't plausible, given what you know. So I think my eyes are instantly focused on, let's rub that out, increasing heart contractility. We've been told someone is suffering heart failure and their heart can't contract properly. So why would it seem plausible that a mechanism to compensate for this is the cause of the disease? It doesn't really make sense. So you automatically narrow it down to 3 options, making your, I guess, life a bit easier. Then if you go down to end diastolic volume. So essentially, end diastolic volume, what does that mean? We talked about diastole here. Diastole is filling. So what is end diastolic volume telling us? It's essentially telling us the volume that the heart is filled with. So how much blood is the heart filled with? So that's plausible that the body will increase how much blood is in the heart in order to combat the fact that it can't pump enough blood out of the heart. So even though it can't contract as hard as it normally does, it can now compensate for this by having more volume and therefore having larger reserve. So that's a plausible option. So we leave a little sign next to it. The next option is systolic pressure. So we've got to essentially think of what systolic pressure again is. If we go up in the stem, give me a second. Systolic pressure is emptying of the heart. So it's saying it's going to increase systolic. What just happened? It's saying it's going to increase systolic pressure. Is this plausible? This requires, I guess, an understanding of some physics knowledge or some background physics knowledge. So think of liquid moving from point A to point B. So why does it move from point A to point B? It moves from point A to point B because there's a pressure gradient. So it's going from high pressure to low pressure. If we increase systolic pressure, we're decreasing this pressure gradient. We don't have this movement of blood. So this means the heart's going to work even harder to try to pump blood. We don't want the heart to work harder because it's already working over time. So whilst this will allow us to increase sort of blood flow, it's not really a viable option because we don't really want the heart to work harder. So you can rule out that one. And again, increasing diastolic pressure. What does this mean? So it's pressure during filling. If we increase diastolic pressure, think of it this way. Diastolic pressure is again involved with the pressure gradient. If we're increasing diastolic pressure, so it's just systolic pressure, this diastolic pressure. If we're increasing diastolic pressure, this pressure gradient, again, going to get smaller. If diastolic pressure starts getting really close, this means the heart is going to work even harder to increase systolic pressure so it can flow blood during systole, sorry. So blood can flow, if that makes sense. So with that, we can rule out option C, and we're only really left up with option A then. Does that make sense to everyone? Let me know if anything needs to be clarified there. Is that all good?
Brain dead.
Yeah, so as Sarah said, you'll get explanations, and honestly, if you need help with any of the questions, let me know, just email me and I'll explain it. So hopefully what you've seen from my explanations is that it's not as daunting as it may seem. It's very important to try to dumb it down as much as you can because it can be very complex and it can trick you into thinking that you require all this knowledge, making you skip a question that you don't need to skip and lose marks over. If you sit there and try to identify the key stuff, the key information, and then try to give it your best from there, you'll do a lot better than if you go, oh shit, I need to know a lot about the cardiovascular system. I'm not going to do this question, I'm going to skip it. So yeah, try to dumb down a question, as better that sounds, and try to define what the problem is actually asking you. Try to reword it in your own words.
Amazing. Yes. Thank you so much. Agreed. Such helpful advice. Thank you so much, Jack. And thank you so much as well to Sana and for all of you for coming along. I'm just going to, why is that doing that? Yay, you did it. Maybe that's just me being cheesy, but you did it. And totally get that section 3 is like, it's the worst that it's at the end because it's so bamboozling. Yeah, like it's a tough gig. But yes, as Jack mentioned, as we've mentioned, just send us an email. And even if you're like, can you just please go over this question again? Absolutely, totally happy to help out with that. Bamboozling is the exact vocab I'd use. Yeah, absolutely. So if you liked anything from tonight, I will make sure that we send through some other resources. We have an ebook that's free. We have more of these masterclasses and things, and I'll just let you know where to find all of them in the email that I send afterwards. And we also do, if you would like to do some more intensive prep, we do have some courses coming up. They're starting in a few weeks. So I'll make sure that I put the links in the chat in case you just want to check them out. I'll just, wait, not very good at. Yes, absolutely I can. So we do have, I put the ebook one there as well. So I think I have a little, here's our ebook slide. here's something about, so I guess the Head Starter course, Head Starter here, it says content for beginners. That one's great for if you, particularly if it's your first time sitting, or if you've sat it before and you felt like the content was just too much for you, then I would particularly say section 3, it's helpful for if you really want some help with what prior content to focus on. And you actually spend 3 hours per week for section 3, just going over content and all of the pre-work content. Whereas for sections 1 and 2, it's like an easier version of section 1 and really pulling apart the texts. And for section 2, it's like spending more time on actually creating ideas, examples, working with the prompt, working with the contention. So if that's where you want to focus, that's probably the course I would recommend starting with. It's also shorter and it's cheaper. So if that's more within your budget or more within like the time span you want to spend on that, and then after that, you're kind of good to do your own thing, that's what I'd recommend. And that one starts soon. It starts on the 29th of June. So feel free to send me more questions about that beforehand or whatnot if you want to know. The intensive course, and yes, Eliza's put in a slide here. If you message Carleen, or you can just email me, it might be easier. If you have someone you want to sign up for anything with at all, anything paid with us, then you can get 10% off. For the intensives, we've got those happening as soon as the Head Starter ends. So you've got a little bit more time to think about this one. I think it's about 5-ish weeks away. This one's more techniques based. So going like much more into depth and probably more what we started touching on tonight. So how Sana was talking about the section 1 techniques, how I really like pushed for making sure you have a really good plan, things like that. You really dive deeper into everything and make sure you're like ready for the GAMSAT. So this one's probably our more popular course. It's longer, it's more intense, and it's more designed for actual GAMSAT questions. So I guess think about like where you're at. If you've sat the GAMSAT before and you're comfortable with the pre-content, I'd recommend this one and probably not worrying about the Head Starter. But Head Starter is great if you want accountability or if you're just really struggling with the content. So that's my little TLDR on that. The last thing I would love you all to do is to fill in this feedback form for us. It literally takes a minute. You don't have to write anything extensive. And by filling it out, we'll detach your email so it's anonymous, but we'll use your email to go into the draw to win some a section 2 marking package, and you can utilize that whenever you like. So would love for you to fill that out. I'm just going to sit here for a few minutes in case anyone has any final questions. Otherwise, have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for coming along tonight, and thank you to Sana and Jack for joining me. And yeah, feel free to send us any emails if you have any other questions.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
No worries. Good luck with your prep, Grace. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.
No worries. Thanks for coming, Isabel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
No worries.
Hi there.
Yeah, hi.
I just wanted to ask that with the intensive